A call to our ancestors, a celebration of our roots, or in other words, a recall to the things we have forgotten, is what singer Dhee and rapper Arivu's track Enjaami is about. Well, let's hear the story today. Valiamma, the grandmother of singer Arivu, descends from plantation workers who returned to Tamil Nadu from Sri Lanka to find no land to belong to. But what actually happened? Tamils working in plantations in Sri Lanka were brought back to India under the Sirima-Shastri Pact, still marginalized, improvised, and largely landless. But where did it all start off? Well, let's head back to the 19th and early 20th century and see that. In the late 19th century, it became obvious that large amounts of labor were needed for the tea plantations. Even today, tea leaves in Sri Lanka are plucked by hand, a time consuming and labor intensive task to ensure that only the tender leaves are selected. To meet the labor demands, plantations recruited many workers from India, beginning in the 1830s because they came from Tamil speaking regions. The migrant workers became known as Indian Tamils, estate Tamils, upcountry Malaya Tamils, or plantations Tamils. Did you know they were not only migrated to Sri Lanka but other parts of East Asia like Singapore and Malaysia too? They are a distinct ethnic group from the Tamils in Tamil Nadu and some parts of northern and eastern Sri Lanka, many of whom opposed the country's government during a civil war that was lasted from 1983 to 2009. Caribbean sugar plantations that used enslaved laborers had been a model of agricultural labor in European colonies. When the British abolished slavery in 1833, other systems of indentured labor developed that bound workers to plantations under conditions that were hardly better. Plantation laborers were exploited, often arriving on the island with a large debt solely as a result of their recruitment. It wasn't until 1922 that a law was enacted that prevented migrant laborers or workers from being forced to pay for their own transportation from India to Ceylon. The workers who immigrated to Ceylon in the colonial era faced very difficult lives in India, including potential starvation from large scale recurring famines, discrimination because of low caste status, and constant poverty. Moving to Ceylon to work on plantations appeared to be an option for survival or possibly better conditions. They were promised work and improved living conditions, but the situations on the plantations in Ceylon were difficult, to say the least. Housing that was built for the workers consisted of rows of rooms no larger than 12 into 12 feet, sometimes with small porches in which entire families lived. There was little in the way of sanitization, water, medical facilities, or schools. Long hours, quotas, and sometimes harsh overseers made the work even more burdensome. In generations since, life has continued to be tough, often made more so by government policies. When Sri Lanka became independent in 1948, Tamil plantation workers were legally designated temporary immigrants and denied citizenship. and in the following year they were disqualified from voting in elections. In the 1960s, an agreement between the Sri Lankan and Indian government led to the forced repatriation back to India for hundreds of thousands of workers, most of who had spent all their lives in Sri Lanka. As a trade off, others were allowed to remain and could become citizens. Although this process was extremely slow, in the 1980s, as a result of strikes and other labor actions, and the desire of the government to reduce the chance of workers supporting Tamil secessionists in the northeast, new legislation granted citizenship to Tamil plantation workers and equal pay to men and women. In spite of a guaranteed wage system and the provision of housing, conditions on the plantations still make the workers among the most marginalized, impoverished segments of the country's population. Their hard work benefits the plantation owners, the country in general, and its balance of trade, while the workers remained mired in poverty. But what is the Sirima-Shastri Pact of 1964? The Indian Sri Lankan Pact of 1964 relating to the stateless persons of Indian origin in Sri Lanka provides a model of a negotiating base of the resolution of a conflict between the two countries instead of allowing it to harden into a non negotiable issue. The conclusion of the agreement, after it had defeated decades of efforts to evolve a solution, was the culmination of environmental compulsions, both domestic and international, which resulted in a modus vivendi, consisted with a number of variables involved in the issue looming large as a major irritant between two neighbors of widely disparate population, territory, and resources at between, say, Cuba and the US. It is pertinent to note that though the ancestry of most of the people of Sri Lanka is historically traced back to India, the labor force which migrated from India during the British colonial era was alien to the dominant race, culture, and religion of the island. This migration began with the coffee era of 1820-1880, when cheap male Indian labor was imported to handle the seasonal needs of the planters because the local population was apathetic to work on the plantations. When a fungus killed the coffee plantations in 1880s, tea was introduced, which required year-round tending and could absorb family labor. Consequently, immigration became a family phenomenon. As such, the immigrant labor population jumped from 10,000 in 1827 to 603,000 in 1921 and 757,264 in 1949, about 12% of the total population. Not all Indians went to the plantations. Some became involved in trade or business, with the result that they became an important economic element in the population. As popular politics began to emerge after the First World War, the Indian immigrant community began to be viewed in Sri Lanka as a threat to the interests of the sons of the soil. A controversy developed on whether or not, like the so called hyphenates in the United States. These people were bona fide Ceylonese and were therefore entitled to the full privilege of citizenship, or whether they were birds of passage, regarding India as their true homeland. The question was exacerbated by the fact that not only was Sri Lanka close to India, but also because the plantation workers were isolated as hilltop communities. They spoke a different language. What happened in the Indian side? A few thousands were put up in a camp in Mandapam in Rameswaram, set up to house repatriates brought back from Sri Lanka. Then they were brought here to Gudalur, a municipality in the Nilgiris district. For the first 10 months, they stayed in small huts with thatched roofs in the middle of dense forests. They cleared the forests themselves so the tea could be planted. 50 years on, Citizenship Amendment Act brings new fears to Tamils repatriated from Sri Lanka.
மலர் கொடி அங்கதமே ஒட்டார ஒட்டார சந்தனமே முல்ல மலர் கொடி முத்தாரமே எங்கூரு குத்தாளம் பச்சைய பூசு பாட்டி அடிக்கின கூட்டுக்கு பாடுபட்ட மக்கா அரப்பு கேட்டு கேரா வேர்வ தண்ணி சுக்கா நாட்டு கேரா அகட்டி கருப்பட்டி பூதாங்கோடு மட்டும் சட்டி அதோட மூணு கட்டி ஆரம்பிச்ச நாகரிங்க ஜன மக்களே புக்கு தப்பு கொட்டு முட்டைக்குள்ள சத்து கொட்டு அட்டைக்கு ரத்த கொட்டு கிட்டி புள்ள பிடி பெட்டு அஞ்சு மரம் வளர்த்து அழகான தோட்டம் வச்சு தோட்டம் செழித்தாலும் கடலே கரையே வனமே கனமே நிலமே கொலமே இடமே தடமே எஞ்சாமி வாங்கோ வாங்கோ ஒன்றாகி அம்பாரி அம்பாரி இந்தாய் தாவுமாரி எந்தாரி எந்தாமி வாங்கோ வாங்கோ ஒன்றாகி அம்பாரி இந்தாய் தாவுமாரி பாட்டம் பூட்டம் காத்த பூமி